Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Essence of Tea podcast, where we talk about all things tea. And today we have our special friend, Greg, who is, I don't know, what would you call yourself? A cheesehead? No, not cheesehead.
Definitely a cheesehead. Yeah, so my name is Greg. I'm a cheesemonger. That means that my job is to buy, cut, and sell cheese 40 to 80 hours a week. I've been doing this for about 7 to 8 years. And I've actually been able to be pretty successful in cheese. I became a certified cheese professional, which is like a sommelier for cheese in 2016. At the time, I was one of only 400 in America. I think right now we're about 1,200 CCPs in North America and around the world. I'm still the only certified cheese professional in the whole state of Alaska, which is kind of cool. Until you realize how small Alaska is, then it's a little less cool. But we're just going to pretend it's a massive state with lots of cheese people.
Hey, we love cheese here, and we love our tea.
Oh, very much so. I've also competed in the Cheesemonger Invitational, which is an international competition where cheeseheads get together and compete on their cheesy knowledge. Most recently at the virtual competition, I got second in America. Second in North America, which I'm very excited about. And particularly for this, Jenny and I have been doing tea and cheese tastings now for about 40 years. I think the first time we tried doing tea and cheese together, we probably went through 20 teas and 30 cheeses. It took about 3 days, and we learned a lot of stuff the hard way. I remember the first time, you mentioned you want to do tea and cheese. We looked it up online to see what other people had done, and there wasn't anything.
That was, I heard about it one time from a chef. I think she was like from the Ritz-Carlton, she wasn't a cheese professional. That was the hard thing. And she was a tea professional, tea sommelier. But then if you don't have the two together, it's really hard to make the best pairing possible. You know, you're just kind of like, it's like a dartboard, and then you look at all the space that's in that dartboard that tiny tip could possibly hit the right one. So there's so many factors that you're going to dive into deeper today, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're going to talk about everything that we did wrong and what we learned eventually. And especially now that there's much better resources for how to do so, we are still learning better ways of putting tea and cheese together.
For sure. Yeah. So so the cheese side, okay?
Yeah.
What do we even need to know? Like I like eating cheese, all kinds of cheese. But usually when I first started learning more about cheese and tea pairing, working with you, I would literally just go to the store and buy random things of cheese. I didn't even know what I was buying. I just knew it was cheese, and then hopefully I'll find a good pairing. So where do we start with our cheese knowledge?
That's a great place to start off this conversation. So if it's possible, try to find a store that has a dedicated cheesemonger that does this for a living. People who sell cheese don't do it for the money, and certainly not the fame or fortune. They do it because they love cheese, just like Jenny does this because she loves tea. If you can find someone who's knowledgeable and enthusiastic, who wants to be there, you're going to be able to have a better experience than even having maybe higher quality cheeses at a shop that doesn't know what they're doing. Right now, I carry around 200 different cheeses from around the world. If you're only wanting to get 3 or 4, that's a 1 in 50 chance that you'll get the best cheese for what you're trying to do. Also, outside of COVID times, please try to only buy cheeses from places that will give you a sample. If they're not willing to give you a sample, if they're not a cut and wrap shop, that might not be the best spot. But until a couple years ago, we didn't even have that here. It's definitely not a thing you can find everywhere. So if you are able to find a high quality cheesemonger where you're able to try things before you buy and able to get exactly the right amount, that's preferable. But if not, we're going to go over some ideas that basically work for almost any cheese and any good tea as well.
Yeah. So should we show what kind of cheeses we have?
Yeah, let's talk about the cheeses we grabbed today. So today we have brought 4 different cheeses. We brought a burrata. This is going to be basically like a mozzarella stuffed with cream. It tends to be a little sweeter. It's very high in fat content. It's also bright white, so on the camera kind of looks washed out. Most mozzarellas are going to be sold very, very bright white, particularly if they're going to be from water buffalo or ones in America where the majority of our mozzarellas are going to be dyed white. We also have a sheep's milk Manchego. This is a 4-month aged Manchego from Manchego, Spain, right in the middle of Spain. We have a older sheep's cheese. This is a Squero. This is from the south of France. And then from Switzerland, we have one of my favorites is a Hallerhocker. This is going to be an aged Alpine style cheese. Think of it like a really funky, super creamy, even better than Gruyere. The reason why we brought this is these are 4 fairly diverse cheeses that we have found these styles go really well with a broad range of cheese. Before we start trying the cheeses or trying the teas, one of the things I think is very important to talk about is the role of temperature. That's something that is true if you're doing cheese by itself, or especially tea by itself. It's also true for wine or beer or any specialty food. Anytime you want to highlight the nuance or the notes or the complex character of a specialty food product, you don't want it to be super cold. This is because of an idea of retronasal olfaction, which is a very fancy way of saying that when you're consuming a product, a lot of what you're experiencing isn't going to be taste, it's going to be aroma. One of the problems we have in the food industry is we always talk about the way things taste, and that's almost of a misnomer. When I say something tastes grassy, that's not physiologically possible. I can only taste sugar, salt, savory, bitter, and sour. If it's not one of those 5 sensations, I'm unable to use my tongue to detect it. Any notes that are grassy or earthy or floral, those aren't things my tongue is able to do. Those are aromas. We estimate that there's more than 1 billion aromas that someone could detect. Some estimates put it around 1 trillion. Most of the math behind those estimates is very, very flawed. But either way, it is significantly more than you're able to taste, which we're fairly certain is around 5. We will talk about the cheeses and get them in the comments later on as well, so that way we can have everyone be able to have access to those cheeses also. So when it comes to, so we talked about how there's something called retronasal olfaction. That is when the aromas go from a solid phase to a gaseous phase and rise up to the back of the throat to the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb is behind, is in the brain, behind the nose. It is what's responsible for the sensation of aroma. We could taste 5 things. We could smell billions of things, probably. The reason why temperature is important is because as something warms up, the ability from it to go from a solid phase to gaseous phase happens more readily. I'm sure we've all seen gasoline on a hot day where we see the vapors coming off the tank of gas while filling the vehicle. That happens more when it's hot. The gasoline isn't boiling. It's not going through a phase change through boiling like we do with heating up hot water.
Yeah.
It's going from a vapor pressure barrier, basically meaning the volatile organic compounds are able to go from a solid phase or a liquid phase to gaseous phase, depending on temperature. What this means is as you consume something warmer, a lot of those notes become more pronounced. I mentioned multiple times that anytime we have a specialty food product, it's important to have it not ice cold. The reverse is also true. If any of us remember our days back in college, or maybe even before, if you had a cheap bottle of vodka and you want to find a way to drink it, you throw it in the freezer so you don't taste how bad it tastes. All of those notes that we don't want to have in bad vodka or bad beer or sometimes in bad cheese will be subdued when it's cold, because the likelihood for it to go from a solid or liquid to a gas is reduced. However, this is not, bad cheap vodka. This is very, very good cheese and world-class tea. So we're going to be serving them the cheeses at room temperature, if possible, as well as the teas at the right temperature. And each one has a little bit different, ideal range. So to have cheese at the right temperature, that generally means have it out for about an hour or so before you enjoy it.
Yeah. And so that's also really important also for tea tastings, because you're smelling them, even the shape of the cup or the vessel, whether you have it in a Chinese tea ceremony cup, or we even have like these aroma cups that are literally for smelling, for for that experience. So when you're just making tea and you're, tea tasting, we call it, but it would be actually the whole experience and the sight, right? Because we also make judgments also off of our sight. We'll already have our past experience influences. That's why you'll hear a lot of times like kids go, oh, I don't want to eat that. And they didn't even try it yet. It's like, oh, it's gross. You're like, how is it gross? You haven't even tasted it yet. And it has to do with their prejudice of what they see as being unfamiliar. Their hesitations about that too. So that's why, like, looking at your cheeses, looking at your teas, and that whole experience, now we're going to be talking about the complexity of combining the two.
And how, in particular, the temperature of the tea is phenomenal because it raises the temperature of the cheese past what you'd normally find in cheese tasting. So if you're doing a nice wine, it might be around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. For a good tea, it's significantly more. And that means a lot of the nuances and the notes you find in the cheese are even more pronounced, which is why tea pairings can be even more tricky than wine pairings. Because you're going to actually taste more of the cheese with tea than you would with almost any other food pairings. And you're absolutely right about not just the way it tastes and the way it smells, but flavor is a multi-sensory experience. The way it sounds is important. And I know that sounds bizarre, but we could actually tell the difference between pouring hot water and pouring cold water. That sounds ridiculous, but if you were to take a blindfold and pour both, most people are able to tell which water is hot. That's one of the reasons why we're out in the woods 1,000 miles away from anything, because it's nice and quiet and we have a chance to really enjoy this opportunity. If you have kids and dogs and stresses in the background, you won't be able to enjoy the experience. Many Michelin-starred restaurants pipe in music and notes and sounds of a happy restaurant into the restaurant to make it sound different, because it will change your experience. So often if you go to a high-end restaurant, the noises you hear actually aren't even the people next to you. There are people on a speaker system being projected in to give you a sensation of a happy experience, because it'll change the way you experience the food.
Yeah, one of the craziest things that we realized in Disney World this year, so we went to Disney World in February, and it was very, very safe there. But remember how I said I have a bad sense of smell, but I don't have a bad sense of smell. It's like I'm very tolerant of things. But my husband was like, do you smell that? Like every time the ride turned, it was the sight, it was the sound, and he's like, they put a particular smell like right on the ride. And he's like, there's a science behind that for the whole experience of it. So it's so strange that you can apply that to so many different things.
Yeah. It's one of the things I love about getting really into any subject is you see the multidisciplinary aspect and the intersectionality of especially all fine food and experiences. So to recap real quick, temperature is vitally important anytime you have something that's delicious. Being in a spot where you're able to sit down and relax and enjoy is important. If I'm worried that my phone's going to go off and someone's calling out of work or there's other life stresses, I won't be able to create this space where we're able to really enjoy what we're doing. And I think especially with what we have today, I want to be able to exist right here and enjoy this with you guys because it is phenomenal.
So what are some interesting things that we learned? I'm going to start steeping the tea right now. What are some interesting things we've learned from the past of trying this out?
There's lots of different ways that we could describe what are good pairings and bad pairings. But especially for the purpose of this podcast, we wanted to talk about 4 ideas that we've found that are largely true. We know that everyone's going to be able to find Jenny's King of Silver Needles white tea at their local grocery store. Not yet, at least. And we certainly know that some of these cheeses that are very small batch coming out of very small portions of Europe are very hard to find. And you're not going to be able to find it depending where you're at in the world. So we're not going to try to focus today in the podcast about what tea and what cheeses in particular you should do, but rather what tea pairing principles and cheese pairing principles we could largely apply to the idea of tea and cheese tastings.
And so preparation is really important because, we have this cheese warming up to room temperature. We're steeping our teas at the suggested time. And I'll let Greg go into more of that, of like how even the temperature of the tea will affect how the pairing happens.
The temperature of the tea and the order in which you consume the tea and the cheese changes drastically. There's a couple different physical and chemical processes that occur anytime that you consume cheese and or tea. In particular with cheeses, because again, that's my job. I just do cheese. Is that most cheeses have good fat. I know fat is a scary word. I hope that most people are getting past the the 70s idea that fat is bad. That simply isn't the way it actually works. It's a lot more complex. Good fats probably don't actually increase fat, and they're probably not actually bad. And without good fat, you can't get almost any of the flavors you're looking for. What I mean by that is when I look at where camera at. I apologize. I'm not very good at this. When I look at this cheese. One of the reasons why this is delicious is because this was only made with a milk that was sourced on the same farm where they made the cheese. And it's only from cows that are able to only eat fresh grasses and flowers and herbs that they're able to find where they live. And what that does, it means you have a lot more fat. As this cheese ages, this one's been sitting in a cave for 1 year. We have a process known as lipolysis. That is the breakdown of the fats. So as the fat that is found inside the cheese is broken down, we get the vast majority of the flavor and aroma compounds. So if we didn't have fat in this cheese, the things we're tasting and experiencing wouldn't be able to exist because they only exist through the process of breaking down those fats. What that means, though, is that when I eat this cheese, I'm going to have a layer of lipids on my tongue. Lipids is a fancy name for fats. So anytime you have fat on the tongue, it's going to act almost like a shield to prevent you from being able to experience more. One of the ways we're able to get around that in the pairing world is to do things that are sparkling or carbonated. That's one of the reasons why things like sparkling wines like champagne and Prosecco are such universal pairings for a lot of cheeses because they're able to scrub the tongue with those scrubbing bubbles.
It's true.
Things that tend to be very strong in alcohol. So like whiskeys go really well with cheese because fat is going to be non-polar. Alcohol, particularly when it gets closer to 80 proof or roughly 40% alcohol by volume, you have large amounts of ethanol that is also non-polar. It acts as a solvent. It's going to take away what's going on along the tongue. With tea, we have the action of the hot temperature combined with the astringency and the small amounts of acidity that are going to basically cut through that unctuous layer of the tongue to allow us to taste more. So besides the fact that tea is going to warm up the cheese in our mouth, so we're able to have more retronasal olfaction with the volatile organic compounds, we're also going to have the fact that tea is going to clean our palate or cleanse the palate to allow us to be able to have each experience be new and continue to being able to suss out the nuance and complexities. So what tea are we starting off with first?
I have the King of Silver Needles white tea.
Mm-hmm.
So this white tea is very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not super astringent. And the mouthfeel of this is very fluffy. It's very downy. So it's going to be very smooth and viscous at the same time, which could influence the pairing also.
Definitely. And for that, we have probably one of the most basic fancy pairings of all time when it comes to cheese. I don't know a single cheesemonger who's worked in the industry for any period of time who didn't have a brief love affair with the Spanish sheep's milk cheeses, particularly Manchego. It was first written about in the year 1605 in the Man of La Mancha. This was cheese that Don Quixote took to go fight the windmills. But evidence points that this cheese has been made for probably 3,000 years in central Spain. This is a super old school sheep's milk cheese. So old that if you notice on the rind, I'm pretty sure I'm on the camera, you could kind of actually see the impressions of a grass basket. At the time, pottery was expensive and hard to find in central Spain. Pyrotechnology was fairly new. So to drain the curds from the whey, they used a grass basket to press it. Because this is a young sheep's milk cheese, they tend to be known for a couple things. They tend to be a little on the sweeter side. They tend to have, oh, look at that. Perfect. Again, I don't do podcasts. I'm totally new to the whole idea of having a camera. I've only done this in person. So this is a new experience. I'm learning all sorts of things. Thank you for bearing with me. Also, thank you, Jenny, for knowing which way is up.
Well, I'm just looking at the camera. So, there you go.
So this cheese, has sheep's milk. Sheep's milk has a little more fat than you normally find in cow's milk cheeses. That means it's a little creamier. It tends to be a little more fluffy, which is part of the reason why it doesn't go well. It also has a little inherent sweetness. Often the way I experience the sweetness in this cheese is going to be the sweetness of like fresh grass. If you remember, after a really hard rain, when it's hot outside mowing the lawn, and you have all of those cuttings, and it has a little bit of sweetness coming through, and it's because the plants have sugar in them, and you can have some of that sweetness inside this cheese, which can go really, really well with a tea. Also, because of where it was from, it tends to be a little saltier, and we have found that saltier cheeses do well with sweeter teas. So the tea should, if we did it right, which I'm pretty sure we did, make it more fluffy.
It all tastes good in the end.
It's going to bring out some of the more grassy notes. It should make this cheese taste a little more earthy. And the cheese should allow the tea to feel sweeter. It should make it fluffier and light. And I hope you can even get some almost little floral notes coming out of that tea by putting them together. Quick note for doing cheese pairings. You can see that I didn't cut these up. A lot of people love the idea of the way charcuterie boards look. The idea of making these beautiful cheese platters that are gorgeous on Instagram. I admit I am kind of fond of them as well. I've made a number of cheese, platters to put on my Instagram, which Jenny keeps reminding me I need to mention. It's Cheese Master G at Instagram.
Yeah, G for Greg.
G for Greg. So I left the rind on. I really like leaving the rind on for cheeses, even if they're cut up on a cheese platter, because first of all, it makes it more interesting. This rind is beautiful. I love the way it looks. Having it on the cheese is more aesthetically pleasing. It also means if I have 3 white cheeses that are triangle shaped, it's easier to remember which one is which. I can look at each one and know what it is, but for someone who doesn't spend 60 hours a week eating cheese, it isn't immediately obvious the subtle nuances between each one. Leaving the rind on, all 3 of these are very identifiable and will allow, we'll change the camera again, will allow someone who isn't a cheese professional to quickly identify which one is which. Also, it means, and it's one of my favorite parts, is if I don't eat the whole thing, it's easier to put back in the fridge for later.
And I did kind of not handle the cheese correctly because I put my fingers all over it.
Oh, we're totally touching the cheese. This is our cheese today.
All right, because normally you want to touch just like the edges of the cheese.
We don't want this one in particular. Let's see. We do the top camera real quick.
Yep, we're on it.
We are?
Yep, this one right here.
Oh, wow, look at that. Okay. I'm really bad at this. And you might even be able to see a little, I don't know if we can get a little shiny reflection from the oils.
There you go. There you go.
So it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but we can see a thin sheen. Again, this is a higher fat content cheese. So what's happening is...
So some of like the whiter specks and then like the darker meat part of the cheese, right? Is that what you're talking
we're
about?
looking at the oily sheen on the outside. This is basically the butter fat of the cheese coming out as it comes up to room temperature. So if you ever have a cheese board and want to know which one's sheep's milk, look for that nice shiny layer of the butter fat just oozing out, showing its provenance and quality.
Okay.
So because this cheese is coated in a very thin layer of wax, we're going to be cutting off the outside of the cheese before we pair it with the tea. And the tea we have is the King of Silver Needles. So we'll quickly just try it here on camera so we're able to describe how to try it together and what it tastes like. One of the things I really like doing, especially with tea and cheese pairings, is trying the cheese by itself first, letting it be a multi-sensory experience. So bringing it up to the nose, and we don't have to pretend to smell it a half mile away. That's not what people do. When you go to cheese tastings, you bring them real nice and close. I get a strong. I apologize. Can I get you a slice? Here, I'm gonna
I'm gonna help myself.
I am glad that you're comfortable enough to.
Well, that's the bottom part. Okay.
There we go.
So we're looking for more of the center. So that's right.
One of the things they're able to do, especially with cheeses or chocolates, or anytime we're trying to really get the aromas, is you cup it in your hand and break it open. There's gonna be a spot where we freshly broke open. We could use a hands to kind of.
Oh, kind of like when we do tea tastings when we go like this.
Yep. Or when you're using this really, really cool tea tasting device where there's a very small opening to concentrate the aromas. For cheese, it doesn't go in glasses very well, but we're able to concentrate it by breaking it off, cupping it in our hands, and really getting some notes out. You get some of that sweetness, a little bit of saltiness, that one of the things we find in sheep's milk cheese is known as lanolin. It's the smell of fresh sheep's wool. If you've ever had like an old like Icelandic sweater that's been there from like your grandfather and smell it, it has that note of lanolin. If you've ever been to a sheep's farm, there's a very particular barnyard note, which is often described as a bad thing. But today, barnyard just means, you know, the way that animals, livestock can smell sometimes, particularly sheep, where it has a beautiful lanolin richness to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to try a small bite of the cheese. We're going to let it move around on the palate. We're going to use our entire part of the tongue. We talked about how the tongue isn't really great at sussing out nuance. So if our tongue is one of our worst sensory implements, we don't want to restrict ourselves to only putting it in the middle or to the sides. When we're trying things, we should use the entire mouth. Even though we only have taste buds, you know, on most of the tongue, you know, move it around, let it warm up, allow it to kind of sit on the palate before digesting. After we're doing that, we're going to take a little bit of the tea and notice how the aftertaste of the cheese changes. So the cheese is going to line our tongue in fat and flavor. It's going to stay there. This is good cheese. This won't be one of those, you know, Costco or Walmart cheese that we take a bite and it's gone in a second. This one is going to linger. It has a very long finish. The finish is referred to as the flavor and the notes on the palate, and then the olfactory bulb after you have swallowed whatever it is. So for wine, after you take a sip of wine and it's still there, if it stays there for a while, it's a long finish. Cheeses will have a long finish. We're going to let that finish sit there. Notice how it feels in the mouth, particularly with the structure, with the body, the way the sensation of the mouth feels. We're going to have a sip of tea and notice how that changes. And then we're going to sit for a second, reflect, and then try another sip of tea. The first sip of tea is going to interact a lot with the tannins, with the fats. The tannins and the fats are going to interact. The volatile organic compounds are going to interact. We're going to get a really good idea of how they play together. And then the second sip of tea, we're going to get a much truer note of the way the tea tastes by itself. And then after we do that, we'll then take a second bite of cheese and a third sip of tea when they're together in the mouth at the same time and see how they build upon each other.
All right, you ready?
Oh, I'm definitely ready. I've been up to 7 hours.
Okay.
I'm a little hungry.
Okay, all right, go ahead. I like to push my cheese to the roof of my mouth too. And you know how like certain cheeses, like macaroni and cheese, it gets like all in your teeth and like it's almost like you feel like you taste it there too.
So I definitely agree. We wanted to let it warm up in the mouth. We wanted to be able to move it around. We talked about how one of the things that happens is the volatile organic compounds, all those the flavonoids responsible for those beautiful aromas. As they heat up, they will go to the top of the mouth and through the back of the throat into the nose. Another thing that happens is the enzymatic reaction of the saliva and the cheese itself or anything that you're consuming. We have an idea that digestion happens in the stomach, and that's not true. Digestion happens the minute that you put it in your mouth. And by digestion, I mean the ability for enzymes and microbes to take these large molecules and break them down to smaller molecules. That's all we're doing with flavors. We start off with these really long, large fats, and we break them up into smaller and smaller particles that give us all these wonderful notes and flavors. That continues to happen as we eat it. The saliva will break down those fats and create new flavors. So one of the reasons why it tastes different than what it smells is even if our tongue didn't work, we would experience a different smell just from the mouth because of the enzymatic reaction in the saliva, as well as the temperature of the mouth warming it up. So now we've let this sit, let it finish. I still have a really, really nice aftertaste of that sheepy Manchego. We're going to take a small sip of the tea and notice how it changes the aftertaste of the cheese. And of course, you know, Jenny definitely showed me up on how we were supposed to sip tea. I'm over here so thinking about the cheese. I totally forgot. We should definitely slurp. You want to talk about why slurping is such a great way?
Same thing with the cheese. You kind of have to chew and use your tongue to help it get everywhere. When you're slurping, you're spraying it across your palate, so it's more instantaneous of that flavor everywhere in your mouth. Unless it's like boiling hot, like be very careful. But it also, if it's boiling hot, helps cool it down.
Yeah, a good slurp will take a boiling hot tea and not burn your tongue.
Yeah,
You're increasing surface area. So surface area to volume is going to be a square relation versus a cube relationship. So I know almost no one else loves math as much as I do, but what that means, as you get smaller and smaller, you get a exponential amount more surface area than you have volume. So by cutting in half and half and half again, by having that slurp, we have a very, very small amount of volume and a huge amount of surface area. All of the ability for it to go from a liquid phase to a gaseous phase only happens on the surface. And that seems like a fancy concept, but it's really easy to understand. If we had a jug of water and we took the top off and we left it there in the hot sun, it would slowly turn into gas. If we dumped it on the sidewalk, it'd quickly turn into gas because it has more surface area. When we slurp, we're making smaller particle sizes, which drastically increases surface area by exponentially because it's a second to a third function. Yeah. So we have now had a chance to use the tea to help cleanse the palate. We're going to try the tea again and notice how the flavor of the tea is different this time. The first time, we're really noticing on how the cheese finish is different.
Oh, do you want more tea? Sip, I drink more. But okay.
It's very good.
I drink almost all of mine
it's hard
that
not
one
to.
slurp.
The second sip of tea, we really want to focus on the way the tea tastes now, as we still have some taste of the cheese, but it's gone.
I still have taste of the cheese in my mouth.
Let's try the tea again and see if the tea tastes a little bit different this time.
Yep, definitely tastes more. It tastes more vegetal to me.
I was about to say the same thing. The first time, out of this beautiful sweetness, and I was confused. I have this tea at my house. I've had this tea at my house for years now. It's one of the ones that lives in my.
I mean, but you drink it. It's not like sitting there.
Oh no! I drink it. This is one that we keep buying because it is so great. And we just tried it now. When we had the cheese in the mouth, I was really confused why it was so sweet. It tasted almost like a candied, sweet, beautiful. Almost like fresh peaches or something.
Yeah. Like I could taste like the texture of the cheese and the little chunks of that, like were harder, tasted sweeter. Remember we were talking about the salt and I mean, it's not salt necessarily, but you know how salt helps bring out sweetness sometimes.
Absolutely. If you want to make something taste more sweet, a little bit of salt and the contrast works out wonderfully. I like to, when I talked about it pairing to my new hires at work, I always call it the Margarita Principle. If you have a sweet, margarita, you want a bit of salt on the outside. Same thing's going on here, but kind of backwards, where we have the kind of salty cheese, and that makes this tea taste sweet. The second note of the tea, after a lot of the cheese had the layer of lipids had been removed, was very vegetal. It was a lot more than I was expecting, not because it's unusual with the cheese for the tea, but it was such contrast to what we had the first time. So now that we've had them separately, we're going to take a bite of the cheese. I'm going to chew it for a second, leave it in the mouth, and then have a sip of tea and let them combine and see how that changes everything.
It's making my mouth salivate even though there's nothing in it right now, which is always a good sign for me. Anyways, I don't know. It's a weird thing that happens to me every time I taste a tea that's amazing. I mean, just a plain tea. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this could possibly be an award-winning tea. I don't know if you do or anyone else does, but for me, like I'm literally, these glands right here are salivating.
Do you know why?
Why?
Your body's prepping for digestion. Your body knows it's going to be something delicious. It's allowing more saliva to be there, which is going to interact with it and help break it down and bring out more of those notes. I haven't studied tea very well, but mostly just with Jenny. But I am positive there are things inside the tea that will be broken down by the enzymatic reactions in the mouth. So by having your mouth ready to do so, it's important. That's one of the reasons why when you go to a fancy restaurant, they make you wait for the food. They don't just bring it out. It would ruin the experience. Yeah. And it's not just because we have the idea we want to have to wait, but by getting prepped for it, by being at ease, by the anticipation, we prep our body to be able to respond to it better, digest it more. And because of that, we actually taste more as well, which is kind of cool and fun.
Interesting. Yeah, most tea tastings that I'm at with other professionals, like, do you feel that? And they're looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, it's like gushing right here, like micro gushing, like in my mouth. So, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. When I try this, all I can think of is how I really want to put some grilled lamb later on this afternoon over the open fire, because it reminded me of the way it smells to have a really nice lamb covered in like rosemary or sage or mint, grilled nice low and slow, on a hot summer's day.
And so this is a sheep cheese.
This is a sheep smoked cheese. So that's where those lamb notes are from the lanolin, which we find in sheep's meat and sheep wool and sheep cheese.
Interesting.
So I think I said we're doing like a 20-minute quick, basic pairing principles, and we've talked for 20 minutes just about Manchego, but this cheese is amazing. Because I know that some people don't want to be here for 3 hours, we'll quickly go over a couple more pairing principles we discovered. I think it was very important, though, that we were able to show our favorite way to put them together. It's not just, put some tea and cheese out and, eat one and then the other. I really enjoy breaking open the cheese, noticing the aromas, noticing the textures, noticing the way it feels, chewing it slowly through the entire palate, swallowing, letting it sit there for a second, and then slurping a nice, beautifully hot tea and noticing how the taste of the cheese changes, waiting, slurping the tea again, noticing how the tea changes, and then doing it together to figure out how they combine.
Which is a good way for beginners to start doing the pairings, is these certain steps.
Or professionals. I think this is one of the best ways to experience what we like to call the third taste, or the idea that we're creating something new. A good pairing isn't cumulative. Cumulative meaning it's not 1 + 1 = 2. This tea, is 1. And I know that's not fair. This tea is a 10. and the cheese is a 10, but it's not a 10 + a 10 makes a 20. This is a 10 + a 10 makes a 25.
Because what the pairing is supposed to do is accentuate all of those characteristics, and it's like an exponential graph.
It makes it taste better. It brings out the parts of the cheese I gush about, and it brings out the parts of the tea that Jenny, loves. And these are things that, because we have been doing it for so long, might seem are a little more apparent to us, but especially for people who haven't tried 300 different Manchegos, having this tea will bring out the parts of the Manchego that I talk on Wax Poetic about that are a little more hidden or harder to find. Putting these together will allow what I want out of this cheese to come forward and what Jenny wants out of her tea to come forward, and that's one of the reasons why it's important. If we had paired this tea with a cheese that was very earthy, there's a tendency to make it taste bitter. As opposed to being vegetal and fresh green, it might taste over roasted green or overly aged. Like there's a tendency for it to taste like the clippings from a lawnmower bag, the next week when it starts to dry out a little bit. We don't want that to come out. And it's not because the tea has it, but it's because the tea and the cheese put together will bring that out. By having something that's younger and a little saltier and a little higher fat content, we let the sweetness come out instead. We did this pairing to allow that sweetness of the tea to be highlighted and some of the salty vegetal notes of the cheese to be highlighted.
Yeah, should we quickly go over the other
cheese
that we have, so we can talk about what they would pair with and why? So
absolutely,
and then we can talk about the times where like what we really wanted to come out was a dud and why.
Yes. And then we'll talk for 3 more hours about this Manchego because it is phenomenal right now. I love Manchego. Other things that we found are absolutely wonderful. One of my favorite cheese, when the first time I met Jenny, was because I was drinking a lot of scotches, and that everyone kept saying, "Oh, no, it's a Lapsang Souchong." I didn't know what Lapsang Souchong was.
Oh yeah, I can make you some Lapsang Souchong.
I came to Jenny. I'm like, Jenny, I didn't know her name. I came to her shop.
The tea lady.
The tea lady at her old tea shop across town, down in the basement.
Yep, down in the basement.
And I horribly mispronounced this tea. I don't remember even how I thought it was pronounced, but it definitely was not Lapsang Souchong the first time I said it. Was quickly corrected and given a glass, and I instantly tasted that nice, beautiful, warm, smoky notes that people who love Islay scotches talk about, and I was finally able to put those flavors together. Because it's one of my favorite teas, it's one of my favorite things to pair as well. One of the things I love doing with it is either a water buffalo milk mozzarella or a burrata. Water buffalo is traditionally what all mozzarella was made out of. Because it is so fatty, roughly 8% fat by dry matter in the fluid milk versus 3 for cows. So nearly 3 times more fat than a good cow, and probably more than 3 than the standard cow's milk you might be able to find in a grocery store. It's going to obscure some of the beta carotene found in the cheese. What that means is the cheese is always going to be bright white. So water buffalo milk mozzarella is always a bright white because the fats are so large and they're so prevalent, you can't see any of the beautiful orange hues that you can find in some of these other cheeses that we have that are a little more tinted. Because of that, and because the traditional water buffalo milk mozzarella was always a bright white, people thought that mozzarella should be white. All mozzarella is dyed white, more or less, with titanium dioxide to make it look like water buffalo milk mozzarella. That's one of the reasons why it's so bright. This isn't water buffalo milk mozzarella. Even though I run a cheese shop, I couldn't get any in for this tasting. Instead, we have burrata. Burrata is one of my other favorite fresh mozzarella cheeses. This one is stuffed with cream. Can we get the down camera?
Oh, the top one right here?
Yes, the top one.
Yep, we're on the top one.
We're on the top one already?
Yes, right there.
Oh, fantastic.
Really?
So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this in half, and you can see that inside it's covered with basically everything that was left over from making the mozzarella.
Oh, it's just so white.
It's so white, it's going to be hard to come out. But basically it oozes out almost like a pudding. You can even see a little bit on the contrast with the blue, how it has come all the way out. And it's basically almost a liquid. I love pairing lapsang souchong or any of this, especially smoky cheeses, with anything with this very, very fatty and a little bit of the fresh milky sweetness. So burrata has that extra heavy cream added in with the leftover bits from making the tailings of the cheese, wrapped in a beautiful mozzarella ball and preserved in whey. But water buffalo milk mozzarella again has a super fatty, creamy, nice sweetness going throughout, and that's going to pair really well with especially teas like lapsang souchong. Another tea that we have brought today is one of my other favorites of all time. Again, if I'm going to be coming all the way up to the middle of nowhere to hang it with Jenny, I'm going to have her make my favorite teas, and it's her organic pu'er.
Oh yeah, the pu'er. So I'm going to take some of the.
Was that this one right here?
This is lapsang.
Oh, okay.
But we can talk about pu'er next.
Lapsang is so good. I've also spent the last couple of days by campfire, so it tastes like being home.
Oh, yeah.
It tastes like where I left, and it's very, very reminiscent of some of my favorite things to do outside of work and just being camping and be outside. But that nice smoky flavors. Sometimes it could be too aggressive or linger too much. With the cheese, it is perfect. It is clean. It is fresh, and it finishes in a way where the tea tastes sweeter, and you get more than just sometimes the smoke, which can be a little strong on this tea. Allows a lot of the other notes to come through as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have also brought pu'er. I mentioned it's one of my favorite teas of all time. It is, I believe, it's one of the only aged teas that it gets as fermented.
Yeah. It's the only one goes that extra process to create, this environment for microbes to start, I guess fermenting technically. Breaking down and fermenting enzymes, same thing with the cheese, right?
Yep, we get these really large flavor molecules and we'll break them down to smaller ones. Every time that happens, we get new notes or new aromas that didn't exist before. Because of the way this that tea is aged and broken down, it has wonderful notes you can't find anywhere else. And not just in any other tea, but anything else I've ever tried in my life.
So which cheese are we going to pair with the pu'er?
Pu'er is wonderful. It's strong enough to hold up to some of our favorite cheeses from all over Europe and America. The one I brought today is Hallerhocker. This is going to be an Alpine style cheese. So cheese is generally, from the Alps, Alpine style Alps. It's going to be a cheese that has more cream added to it, that is aged in the cave, that is tends to be very brothy. Often I get notes of like good gristle or steak or a nice umami from sauteed mushrooms. And that combined with the tea is just phenomenal. It makes them both taste more meaty and robust.
Yeah, and then what's the next? Oh, wait, and then we had matcha.
And we have matcha.
What were you going to do with matcha? Should I make a bowl of matcha really quickly?
We're doing this guy right here.
Okay.
Squirrel.
While you're talking about that cheese, I'm going to make you some matcha.
Oh, fantastic. I also love matcha. As you can see, clearly I'm just using this to eat my favorite cheese and my favorite teas. That's how I prefer to live my life. This is a squirrel. It's going to be another sheep's milk cheeses. Sheep's milk cheeses pair really well with everything, especially things that tend to be more higher in tannins, like a lot of wines are beautiful sheep smoked cheeses. And a lot of cheese goes so well with sheep smoked cheeses because the complexities that you find in them. This one is from the Basque area, the south of France, and actually in 2018 at the World Cheese Awards, was named the best cheese in the world. It's a phenomenal sheep smoked cheese. We're going to pair that with the...
That's sheep's milk
this
also.
Yep, this is sheep's milk also, but this one's going to be aged. The first one we did was very young, so it tends to be a little fresher, brighter. You get a lot more of the fresh cut, clean grass. You get a lot more of the nice sweet notes. This one's aged, so it becomes, as opposed to getting notes of like fresh cut grass, it's more notes of hay, more redolent of hazelnuts, or notes of warm nuts, buttery, a little earthier. We're pairing that today with the matcha because the first one we wanted to bring out some of the really nice sweetness of the silver needles. This time we're looking to bring out to kind of pair up with the vegetable notes, but not make it overpowering, and instead make the tea taste a little bit sweeter, and the cheese have some of those more nutty notes come out.
So how would you pair this with a matcha, though? The same way that we did before?
Absolutely. I really believe that in our experience, we have found one of the best ways to do tastings with cheese, especially with tea, is we're going to first grab a piece of cheese. Oh, I don't think I've ever shown Jenny this cheese. So yeah, we have to try it.
That's why I was like, what? I don't know this one.
A square. So we're going to then break it open.
Oh, I love it already, just from the smell.
You get that, it has a lot, almost caramel notes that we didn't find in the Gunger sheep's milk cheese.
Oh yeah, it totally smells different once you crack it open.
Yep. We're exposing more surface area. The mechanical action of physically shearing the cheese is going to unlock this flavor. It allows it to go to a gaseous phase.
So good.
Even more so if you break it than if you cut it. If you break it in half, it's going to even be more of a reaction because you're allowing it to break along the lines where the curds are fully fuse back together.
Yeah.
In the cheese industry, we call this cleavage. If I'm sure Jenny could do it better than I, but if she could show the break point and how it looks different and how it's not clean. You can see how it's jagged, how it's not smooth. It didn't break like you might find a more elastic cheese like a Swiss, but instead it's very uneven. And it's because,
this one totally sheared unevenly. So.
And that cleavage, where it broke, is going to give us a lot of these beautiful aromas when we break it open. So now, as I mentioned before, the first thing I love doing, smelling it, letting it sit in the tongue, letting it warm up, chewing it, using the tongue to move it around the entire mouth. We want to be able to utilize every last bit of our mouth to be able to enjoy this cheese, not just, a small amount.
Definitely different texture than the last one.
This one is aged for a lot longer. It's aged for about a year. It's a lot drier. It's a lot more. Right now I'm getting notes of like hazelnut butter.
Nutty.
Nutty, earthy. Not too salty, but there's definitely some salt going on. So what we're going to do, as we did before, we're going to spritz the palate with a little bit of this matcha. It's bringing out almost like a spicy note in the cheese that definitely wasn't there before. Like a gamey spicy note. I want to take another sip of the tea.
It's a delay. Like that note, like you drink the matcha and the matcha is so potent and bold and you have to wait. And then that other cheese note comes out. Like I don't know. It's maybe because it's matcha. I don't know why the other pairing was more immediate, where this, it took a little bit to, or at least for me, maybe it's where I put the cheese on my tongue.
No. I definitely agree that when we talk about finish, we talk about, like the mid finish and the long finish. We talk about initially right after, having how it tastes, and then how it tastes, 3-4 minutes later. I'm noticing that, the astringency has definitely, it's almost drying at first. But as you're able to move it around, we're getting a lot of those really nice roasted meat notes. And before it was kind of like a sweeter hazelnut. This time we're getting quite a bit more going on.
Less of the sweetness of it. Definitely more like mushroomy, kind of.
A lot of mushroom. I also this really nice, like white pepper spice. There's a piquancy that I haven't experienced in this cheese before. That must be there somewhere, and the cheese bringing it out. I'm getting that little bit notes that sharper edge, that piquancy.
And spicy notes, not, and that's in like hot and heat. Spicy as in, you know, not like a jalapeno pepper, but like notes of like making your tongue tingle in certain spots, like it's jumping around. At least that's how it feels like for me. I'm like, oh, I could see what was like spicy. Like, you know, cinnamon isn't necessarily hot per se, depending how big the chunks of cinnamon are. But it feels like it's like popping, like micro popping all over the edge of your tongue, at least for mine.
Definitely, if we were to talk about these cheese pairings we'd have just done today from like a dinner. Now, this is the main course. This is the meat and potatoes. The first one is definitely, you know, like an hors d'oeuvre of an appetizer or even a dessert. And the poorer, you know, is a great like mid-course meal, but this is like the meat and potatoes of it. You know, it's very, very earthy. It's very heavy. It's unctuous. You definitely get the notes of like, you know, roasted portobello, a little bit like the autumnal sort of spice where it's not hot like a pepper, not the capsaicin, but definitely has some piquancy to it, which is beautiful and makes the tongue come alive.
Yes, excellent. Okay, so let's go into like some of the mistakes that we have learned from the past of all the cheese and tea. First of all, you can't force a pairing. Like you might think you know the cheese, you might think you know the tea, but it's just like when you're blending tea, for those of you who know how to blend, you can't have flavors all be at the same level, otherwise they clash instead of missing each other, you know, and creating layers. So I feel like that's the same thing with pairing and pairing with cheese is you're like, oh, it's got to be good. It's got this about it, and then it's got that about it, and it's got to go well together, but then it doesn't.
If we just found like the best cheese in the world last year and the best tea in the world last year, they might not go together at all.
Yeah, that's true.
So some of the things that we found that you should be careful of is like Jenny said, you can't armchair quarterback this. You can't just say, oh yeah, I read this on the internet, let's try it together. If possible, I implore you to try it before you show it to other people as well. Like, don't show it to someone's house saying, yeah, I took this awesome class with this weird guy in Alaska who said, put these together. Try it for yourself. Portions are important, temperatures are important, and subtle differences in the tea and cheese are important. As much as we try to have consistency, that's not actually the goal of high quality cheese. I'm not trying to have every will of the squirrel taste the same, because not every blade of grass that the sheep ate was going to be the same. Not every spot in the cave where it was aged is the same. We're really trying to showcase the beauty of the land and of the system, not necessarily having it be consistent. I read once one of the differences between craft cheese versus mass-produced cheese. Is mass-produced cheese, they alter the ingredients to make it consistent. And in craft cheese, you might alter the recipe and you don't alter the ingredients to showcase the differences. You want to make it taste different. Cheeses made in the fall versus the spring are wildly different. Two wills in the same batch are different. One of the reasons why I said you should try to find some place where you could try it is because every will is going to taste different, and a good monger will be able to show you saying, hey, this one just got in is phenomenal. This one I usually love. Right now, it's not actually what you're looking for. So,
oh yeah, and that reminds me, one of the years that we were getting ready to do a class, there was a certain like a drought or a monsoon or something had happened in that area where the animals feed. And so you could taste it in the cheese that the flavor was not there. It was like washed out or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but something like that, right?
Absolutely. One of my favorite things for these Alpine style cheeses where they're able to graze is sometimes you get notes of onion or notes of garlic or literally something that one cow ate on one day will make it into the cheese and make the whole wheel taste that way. So for artisanal cheeses, you definitely want to taste it before you do it. Don't armchair quarterback it. Don't like look it up online line and just show up and hope it to be for it to be good. There's a lot more variability, which means it has to be a little more hands-on. With that being said, some general rules we found to avoid is often some of the cheddars with tea tend to taste very, very sour. So be careful with sharp cheddars. Sharp is a weird word. Sharp doesn't mean more flavorful. I'm not saying avoid those super aged cheddars with wonderful, nice grassy notes, but I am saying ones that have more of that acidity. So sharpness is going to be the sensation on the sides of the tongue that make it curl up. It means it's more sour. It means it's more acidic. Sometimes you want to be careful with tea because you don't want the tea to taste overly sour. That can be described as an off note for tea. Although not always, but if you do have the off note, you need to add sugar as well. Like if you have like an English breakfast tea, having something that was a little sour, if you had honey, would be great. But if it was not with honey, it would definitely make the English breakfast taste off, and it would not make the cheese taste better either. Anytime you have a tea that has nice sweetness, try to pair it with cheeses that have saltiness. Teas that are more assertive or have more tannins. Tannins are the structure you find in wine to give it a body. It's basically the feel of the tea to a degree. Pair it with cheeses that have more body, can stand up. Now, body for cheese doesn't always necessarily mean hard. You might cheeses that are triple cremes, delicate French triple cremes that are nice and buttery, have a lot of body because they're very thick. They have a lot of fat. They're close, to butter, so they have great body on the tongue, so they hold up to tannins, which is kind of interesting. Because you'd think that those super delicate light cheeses wouldn't hold up to those big baddies, but they often do if they have enough fat there to have the body to hold up to the tannins. We have found that blues and teas are amazing, but very hard to do. Again, if you're going to be doing blues, you really want to have that sweetness. Blues are known for this really nice salty minerality. By having teas, like some of the green teas what sort of green teas have nice sweetness to it?
Oh, well, like the cookie cha is pretty sweet. We had a sencha that was kind of sweet too, but that was also very green and vegetal. But there's some pretty good pairings with the sencha too.
We've done sencha a couple of times. A lot of the sweeter styles of green teas go really well with saltier cheeses, even a blue. We have found, let's see, what else we...
I know we did a cheddar before.
We did a cloth-bound cheddar.
Oh yeah. What do you remember?
So cloth-bound, I think it was either the Beechridge Flagship Reserve cloth-bound cheddar or the Cabot cloth-bound cheddar. I think at some point on both. These are aged cheddars, but they're not very sour. They're not very sharp. Instead, they have really beautiful, grassy, earthy cavern notes, and those tend to go really well with some of the teas that are warmer and have that and tend to be like some of the warmer black teas that we have come across.
And like another sweeter type of tea, but would be a black tea, would be like a Keeman black tea.
I think Keeman was the one we actually did. I'm pretty sure it was the Keeman that we did with the cloth-bound cheddar. I have some notes over there. We'll find it later.
Yeah, we have so many notes.
The question and answers. Pages and pages of notes.
Yeah. So yeah, well, this was a great introduction to cheese and tea pairing. And so remember, we can find you online on Instagram, right? What was that again?
Cheese Master G, all one word.
Yeah, and Greg is great at teaching cheese classes. He has a lot of knowledge. And so check him out. And we're so glad that you're able to join us today on the Essence of Tea podcast. Oh, let's high five.
Oh, high five? Wait, I thought we were going to pause.
Pause.